Okay, so in the section above, we've talked about levels of measurement, and there's two main categories of levels of measurement, and this is going to be important when it comes to which type of data analysis you're going to use. So your two categories are categorical and continuous. So when you look at your categorical data, there's binary, there's nominal, and there's ordinal. So binary just basically, of course, means bi is two. So there's two categories, males and females, dog and cat, bird and fish. All right, and when I say there's only two categories, obviously when I talk about bird and fish, there's a whole lot of more animal categories, but if those are the two things we're measuring, there's only two categories in that. So nominal, you have more than two categories. So in this case, the example that I have up here is nations, okay, but it's categorical because there's United States of America, there's South Africa, there's England, there's Russia. All right, there's not numeric values that are associated with that. It's just those particular countries. And then of course you've got ordinal, and ordinal is these categories that have a logical order. And so I always like to think of ordinal data as ranked data, all right, because the person who is ranked number one is obviously better than the person who's ranked number two, who's better than the person who's ranked number three, and so forth. So there's a logical order in that, but there's not a equal distance. I want to say distance between rank one and rank two. So when you think of a measurement scale, a person, for instance, who is ranked number one in the 100 meters may run 10.34, and the person who's ranked number two may run 10.37. All right, so the person who's second is not 2 times slower than the person who's number one. Okay, and then we've got continuous data, and those continuous data has two variables, interval and ratio. The primary difference between these is whether or not the value can go below zero. So when we have interval data, we got to think about, okay, what is it that I'm measuring? And is what I'm measuring, does it go below zero? So temperature, for instance, is a very classic one. You can have negative 10 degrees, or you can have 0 degrees. That doesn't mean temperature goes away. All right, so it still exists. A lot of our measures don't usually have negative values, but you might have some variables that you measure that can give you a negative value. Golf score, for instance, is also a negative value. Ratio data cannot go below zero, and I put a heart rate on here. A lot of you guys who use surveys, you're going to get a survey, and that survey is going to give you a particular score, and if you get a score of 0, that means they didn't answer the survey. In this case, if I measure someone's heart rate and they don't have a heart rate, they no longer are with us. Okay, so some examples of levels of measurement. You've got emotional intelligence. All right, so some of you might be looking in that. So how do they measure emotional intelligence? Maybe you're doing a survey, but it's ratio data because a total score is being obtained, and that value means something. Leadership type, it's nominal data. Okay, which leadership type are you? Can you only fit into one category? Now, I also realize that some of your surveys are going to be measuring leadership type. All right, and based on the numeric value is going to determine whether somebody's a leader, what type of leader they are. But if you had to ask a person, oh, are you a transformational leader? What type of leader are you? Then they're going to just tell you. Retention rate is ratio. It's a numeric value, cannot go below 0, and those values mean something. And then lastly, here's just a couple of examples. So does mindfulness training have an effect on emotional intelligence? So I have to ask myself, what's the dependent variable? In this case, my dependent variable is emotional intelligence, and the type of data is ratio, and my independent variable is mindfulness. My second one here, is there a relationship between international travel and a leader's cultural intelligence? And I have question marks to the dependent and independent variable, because if you're only looking at relationship, you don't have a dependent and independent variable. You're just looking at relationship. If I was going to predict cultural intelligence based on international travel, then my cultural intelligence will depend on international travel. Cultural intelligence is my dependent variable. And then the last one here, is there a difference in emotional intelligence between males and females in higher education? So again, I'm measuring emotional intelligence. That's my dependent variable, and my independent variable is gender. All right, so I've got males and females. So the big questions that we have here are, what are you measuring? So when you guys think about your proposals and you think about what it is you're doing, what are you measuring? how are you measuring your dependent variables? Because somebody might come, well, I'm going to measure motivation of leaders. Okay, well, how are you going to measure motivation? You're just going to look at what they're doing. You're going to do a survey. Are you going to interview them? What are you going to do? And then the type of data you're collecting, is it ordinal? Is it nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio? And again, this is going to come back because based on the type of data that you have will determine which type of analysis you're going to run.